Welcome, everyone. We'd like to thank you for joining us. We have a star-studded panel this evening for racial policing and the color of justice. So I'm going to start with our first guest. We have Lenita Baker, who's co-counsel for the Breonna Taylor case. So Lenita, let's start with you. Lenita, why don't you talk to us? And we've been going through all of these cases over time. We have a recent case in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. We have your case in which you worked on, in which the police were not prosecuted. What can we do differently, and where are we? Mr. Watson,
Lenita, you're on mute.
I think we're on. Can we get you off of mute, Lenita?
She's getting there. She's
All right, there we go.
The host had to let me off mute. And I tried
Okay.
to, I was like, oh shoot, I muted it during the video and then couldn't get myself off mute. Can you repeat your question?
Yes,
sorry.
absolutely, Lenita. So I said, as co-lead counsel for Breonna Taylor and her family, you've seen this movie before. Why don't you talk to us about what is it that we can do now? We've had Rodney King, who was prosecuted. The police officers in the Rodney King case were prosecuted to no avail. We now have George Floyd. The police officers in George Floyd case were prosecuted and were actually convicted. At least we have one police officer who was convicted. Now, where are we now that you think would change from the Rodney King case all the way up to George Floyd, and what can we do as a community?
I think as a community, we have to continue to push for legislative change. We have to push for change, legislative change to hold our officers accountable criminally. I think there has to be a portion of the liability. I'm never going to be one of those people that say the police officers need to pay their own civil judgments, because I know they don't have the money or the insurance to pay their own judgments, but having police officers required to carry some form of liability insurance. And if they don't get liability insurance, then they can't serve. So it's all legislatively, and until we get the laws changed, qualified immunity, we hear so much about it. Some of the criminal exceptions that police officers do get and are afforded, and juries are out to give police officers the benefit of the doubt, where they won't give the average Joe that benefit. I think we have to make body cameras mandatory. If body cameras are mandatory, I think that's what we're seeing now. We know that police brutality is not new. It's not, it didn't start with Tamir Rice. It didn't start with Eric Crawford in Ohio. It didn't start with Rodney King, but Rodney King was one of the first ones that was caught on video, not body camera, but it was caught on video, not cell phone cameras, but not video. We have to stop efforts by legislators to want to criminalize when people film police officer interactions, because that's what some states are trying to do. And then we have to vote for people who are going to push the legislative change. We have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act currently pending in Washington, D.C. And we'll probably talk more about that just as a panelist. That's what we tend to do. Mm-hmm. But I do want to say, while federal legislation is great, most people come into contact with state police departments. So we have to make sure that state legislation is being changed as well. But the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and you see them already like, oh, well, maybe we should take qualified immunity out. Well, that's like the biggest part of that legislation. And so we have to push our legislators to be bold enough to push forth bold legislation and not shy away from.
I'm going to run to Nick Charles. Nick Charles is an elected official in the Maryland House of Delegates, and he represents the 25th District. So Nick, why don't you talk to us about some of the legislation that you are contemplating in the Maryland House of Delegates that touches some of the issues that Lenita just talked about?
Lenita brought up a lot of great pieces of legislation that needs to be addressed, not only federally, but across other states. But Rich, I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at what has transpired in the news, how Maryland has been one of the first states to repeal the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights.
Yes.
We have also additionally made independent investigations normal now, so that you don't have officers being investigated by their own peers, but by the community. and other people that are appointed locally. One of the things that she mentioned about the cameras, universal cameras are now moving to be mandatory in the state. So these are things that have all passed recently in Maryland House of Delegates, throughout the Maryland State Senate. And we have overturned the governor's veto. So the governor of Maryland vetoed a lot of these pieces of legislation.
Yep.
And luckily for us in the state of Maryland, we have a majority in the Democratic Party and a veto-proof majority. So we were able to override the vetoes of the governor and bring these into effect. Lanita hit it right on the head. You have to have your legislators take these bold initiatives and steps to move forward, because if we don't, we'll continue to sit in the same situation that we've been sitting in for the last 100 plus years. So Lanita, thank you for all of the good work that you're doing. You are loved and appreciated. You know, we see everything that you're doing, and keep up the fight over there too.
Our next panelist is retired Police Major Leroy James from the Maryland Prince George's County Police Department. So Leroy, I know that you were on the force for over 27 years of service. So why don't you tell us your reaction to what Delegate Nick Charles and Lanita have been talking about thus far?
Well, I think that they both hit it right on the head. Elected officials are elected by the people to represent the people. And so I think that through legislation, through our senators and our representatives, the things that need to get done, and just like Delegate Charles was saying, man, I've been reading about the changes that are being made in Maryland. And I think Maryland is going to pave the way for some other states to follow. It's a good model. Came about in the state of Maryland, and it afforded officers some privileges that, you know, as a regular citizen, the regular citizen didn't have those types of privileges. So now what they've done is in Maryland, they've basically overturned the LEOBR, which is the Maryland Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, along with the other things that he said. But there's so much more that needs to be done. And the one thing that always concerns me when it comes to legislation and passing laws and things like that is the follow-up, is the what happens next. Because that is, you know, I was involved when I was on the police department. I was involved in a consent decree as the administrator for a consent decree that we had in Prince George's County. And when you talk about reform and things that to help the police department get better at doing their job, and constitutional policing and all of that type of thing, you've got to have follow through. So when the Justice Department came in and they gave us the consent decree and a memorandum of agreement, it was good to see us implement those things, but they've got to be sustained over time. So, you know, one of the things that I hope, and I hope my colleagues agree, is that, you know, I look at Prince George's County, for example. Our county executive formed a task force to attack this issue on policing, and they came up with these recommendations. And all of that is fine, and it's great, because you got to have involvement from the community, but it's got to be sustained involvement over time. And so I think that, you know, we're, at least in Maryland, and some other places are on some of those reform efforts as well, are doing well. But we have to sustain it over time.
A. Scott Bolden, why don't you talk to us a little bit about consent decrees and the use of consent decrees? A. Scott Bolden is a high-profile attorney, one of the best defense attorneys in the country, but began practicing as a prosecutor, as a federal prosecutor in particular. Why don't you give us some insight as to the use of a consent decree and how that may affect some of the change that we're talking about as well today?
Well, consent decrees are issued by the Department of Justice, and depending on who's in the administration, they can effectively be used as a carrot, a stick, and a sword to get local police departments. I think there are about 3,200 police departments all around this country, carrot, stick, and sword, to get them to do constitutional policing, to be excellent in their policing as a goal and objective, and a monitoring system that gives feedback and checkpoints along the way at those requirements. But I think Lee is absolutely right. It's all about follow-up. You know, legislation and consent decrees are great, but who's leading these police departments? Is the culture at the top of your police department tolerant of bad policing? Is it tolerant of rogue cops and those who are Ku Klux Klansmen or Nazis and others that we have found in the police ranks? Is your leadership wanting to weed that out, if you will? Because the police killing fields all around this country, it's not like in the South or North, it's all around this country. And the police, if you have a police department and police officers who don't see us, who don't see the humanity in us, right? Then they kill us. Not all. And by the way, I don't believe in bad apples and cops, right? I believe that excellence is all around us. But if you tolerate bad policing in your department from a leadership standpoint, or even from a partner standpoint, then that poisons the whole apple orchard, if you will. And so the leadership's important. Voting in every election, up and down ballot, electing people who lead and share our values and our humanity and oppose police oppressing Black people and going from zero to deadly force. I want to say that again. In all of these shootings, right, Breonna Taylor, Arbery, Tamir, when it comes to people look like me and you, the police seem to go from zero to deadly force to force compliance.
Right.
Why is that? 4,000 people, insurrectionists attacked the Capitol. They climbed, they killed, they maimed, they broke windows, and no one of those insurrectionists was shot and killed. One was out of 3,000 or 4,000. If those people had been Black, you'd have 3,000 or 4,000 dead Black people in front of the Capitol. Right. And they would say it was the cost of democracy. Mm-hmm. Let's be real about this. So they need to see us, and they don't see us. Their supremacy, their privilege that they did not earn makes them not see us, and so they shoot us or treat us in a negative manner. And then finally, who are we giving guns to and badges and uniforms with the American flag on it, right? That's where it starts. I could care less about training. I think the training should take care of itself. But what is the mentality of those who want to be police officers and you're going to give them a gun and a badge? And if you look at who's been shot over the last 5 years, each one, whether there's a struggle or not, is they go from zero to deadly force. They use deadly force. Should comply with a police order, it's the law. But if I don't, that doesn't mean you shoot me. Right? That doesn't mean you use deadly force. You better figure out another way to get me to comply. Otherwise, the killing fields will continue, and they have continued. Even during the George Floyd trial, they were killing us.
That's right.
And so lots of work, legislation and all that other stuff, the other things that I mentioned, those are all really important.
Excellent point. Lee, I want to follow up with you on that precise point regarding intake first, and then go to de-escalation. But talk to me about the intake process. When we're bringing police officers or those candidates that want to go into law enforcement, what should we do on the front end? Particularly, there's been a significant discussion around implicit bias as part of the process in bringing in individuals to the law enforcement ranks. Talk to me about what you suggest as an area that we need to work on and grow, whether it's through legislation or through police officers locally, in terms of the intake process that you think would be effective.
Yeah, okay, great point. So one of the things that I'm always troubled by is, when it comes to police officers, they go into a police academy, and it's a training academy. Now, it's termed training for a myriad of reasons, because there are many things that you learn that you train upon consistently over and over, and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I've always been, careful of is I would rather see training and education, because that was one of the things that really helped me to move up the ranks in the police department, is really pursuing education And a lot of it on my own, but some of it would help from the police department in addition to the training. So one of the things that I noticed is that, you know, a lot of officers come into the field, a lot of candidates come into the field. They go through basic training, which is mainly for most police departments, it's about 6 to 8 months. And then they're sent to their first assignment and they work under a field training officer. Now, that area, again, can be tricky because, you know, a field training officer, you can have the best field training officer. You have some of the best out there, but you have some that have been on the job for quite a while and they've developed attitudes. And sometimes, you know, those attitudes rub off on new officers. So one of the things I would also say about intake and new officers coming in is there's got to be a re-examination and a reimagining of the people or the areas that you're going to serve in. Who are those people? And sort of really, I would like to see more people from the community become a part of the police department. And in some places it's like that, but not across this county. You have officers from all over the United States. And a lot of them are not familiar with the people in the area or the culture. And so I think that there should be more of an emphasis on education in addition to, let's say, how to shoot, how to training you how to shoot or how to drive a car in a high-speed situation, etc. There's got to be more of an education as to, you know, the jurisdiction you're going to work in. You know, one of the things Mr. Bolden said earlier, we were talking about the number of police departments. There are so many police departments in this country. I believe that at last count it was like 18,000.
I undercounted it.
Oh yeah, you undercounted. That's okay. That's okay. It's about 18,000.
Right.
And they range from your large departments with thousands of officers to your small 1 or 2 person department. And most departments in the country are very small. You know, 4, 5, 6 people at the most. What kind of training are they getting? You know,
Sure.
You know, so I really want to think about training, but education in addition to the training, because for me, policing, it's one of those things. You're always learning, and you should always be learning. And I think that's how you get better. And then, you know, the part about community policing, you know, a lot of police departments in the
Lee, I hate to cut you off, but I know
Yes.
we're short on time for Lenita. So
Go
I
ahead.
want to make sure that I switch it back to Lenita. So Lenita, why don't you weigh in? I know that in Louisville in particular, there's been a discussion regarding the Justice Department, specifically looking at the police department in Louisville, Kentucky. So talk to me about what's happening in Louisville that can shed some light into this conversation.
Well, I'm gonna also jump in on the training, and I'm for one tired of I think we give them a pass when we use this term implicit bias.
Okay.
At this point in time, it's not implicit anymore. It's just downright bias.
It's just bias.
We know it.
Right.
So you're being racist and prejudiced in the way that you police. I don't think we out-train or out-educate ourselves of the culture. They know better. They refuse to do better. And so, you know, I hate to drop the bomb and let the rest of the panels leave, but it is. And they hate on the term defund the police, but when you break down defunding the police and you look at what it really means, it's allocating resources. Police officers aren't equipped to deal with mental health crises.
Right.
Divert those funds. Like here, 80% of I think it's like, it might not be 80%, but it's a high percentage of our city.
Right.
200 million of a city the size of Louisville is ridiculous, but we don't have enough resources for those people who are suffering from mental illness. We don't have enough resources for those people who are suffering from drug addiction or any other. Allocate those resources to those individuals and to treatment facilities, and you won't need so much going into the police department. 18,000 police departments is just we can't out-train or out-educate ourselves of bad police officers. And I like to take Chris Rock's statement in when he said, we can't, he's like, we always say, you know, there's a few bad apples in the police office. Now he's like, that's like saying we got a few bad pilots. You know, American Airlines, like we have a few bad pilots, but most of them are good. So you likely not to have one of the bad pilots. But what, like, we
Right.
That's right.
And so to go, you know, on that, the Department of Justice consent decree, they're only as good as the enforcement. Like, and Scott talked about it a little bit. We really have to stay on, and we have to really pressure them to do the right thing. But that changes with the administrations. Who's to say if in 4 years, if we have a different president, a different attorney general, what are they going to do with it? Like, oh, we were in the midst of investigating, or we were carrying out this consent decree, but we're not too worried about that. We really do have to focus on changing the laws, making sure that the laws change. What Scott said, voting down the ballot, not just in presidential elections. Most states, you have elections almost every year, every 2 years. We need to be at the ballot box, both on primary day and general election day, because they both matter. And that's the only way we're really going to get out of this, is to change the laws, begin to hold officers accountable. I hope the judge throws the book at Derek Chauvin, you know, to really set that example of we will not tolerate this. So,
And we also have the Breonna Taylor law.
yes, banning no-knock search warrants, and also requiring the use of body cameras. There's some more legislation that we talked about, because again, it's when you get into these cases and the amount of stuff that's why I said I used to be one of those people, oh, it's training. But when I start getting into the documents and the complaints and the way that they had complaints or had this and had that, it's a culture. So it's not about training.
A culture of lying too.
Yes.
They're lying.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it's not training, it's upending that the whole system of we got to get rid of them covering for each other. But Breonna, like we put it, people were wondering why in our settlement negotiations, one of the reforms that we put in there is that they have to leave if they recover a large sum of money from an arrest or executing a search warrant, they got to leave their body cameras on until they turn it into the property room.
That's right.
How many, if you could only imagine how many calls we get the amount of calls that we get now because of Breonna Taylor's case with Louisville Metro Police it's outrageous. I wish I could take them all, but I go crazy and we can't. But the sad thing is that when they call, we're used to be like, because like Scott, I'm a former prosecutor. I also did defense work. So I used to always be like, I don't know. But after digging in the documents, now I'm like, it probably did happen, you know, and
right. So Lenita, before you go ahead, Scott, and then I'll ask the question.
One of the ways, you know, Lenita may not be on board with hitting them in the pocket, but here's a way you can hit them in the pocket. If you don't keep your video cam on and you don't film everything and you don't follow police regs or regs, then you get a strike. Yeah. You get due process, right?
That's right.
But then you can affect your pay. And if you get 3 strikes, you get thrown off the force, right? Because if you're a good police officer, you don't have a problem videotaping your arrest if you're a professional. That's one way you can hit them in the pocket, and that's easy.
One thing here, though, and to make that really have an impact on the individual officers is these FOP unions. We hit them in the pocketbook, the FOP union comes and pays them for whatever the penalty was for.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you get 3 strikes, you're off, and you get due process, right? But it will be a deterrent.
It will be a deterrent.
Camera.
Right. That's right. Lenita, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We really appreciate you weighing in. No problem. We'll make sure that we follow up and we'll have a second part 2, and we'll make sure that you join in this for part 2. So thanks a lot. Everyone join me in welcoming and thanking Lenita Baker.
Thank you. Have a good one.
So Delegate Nick Charles, I want to follow up on what Lenita was talking about in terms of legislation. Separate and apart from legislation, what we saw in the Derek Chauvin case was not only did we have a wonderfully prosecuted case, but we also had agitation. So we had outside agitation. So we had we had protesters that actually had an impact, in my opinion, on the jury that was certainly selected, but also on the coverage of the case as well. Talk to me about your constituents and what you're expecting and what your constituents are expecting from you as the protest and also leading this charge on social justice reform.
You know, agitation is the best irritation, man, to make any change in any society. So, you know, as we're looking at all of the issues come across our TV screens, our Instagram timelines, and see all of our brothers and sisters dropping like flies due to hands of criminal police officers, to come out. Because I don't think we would have had the same level of support for the repeal of the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. I don't think we would have had the same level of support to get some of the, you know, the mandatory cameras that go into effect in 2023. I don't think we would have got the independent investigations that have to take place if we didn't have the community getting engaged in the process. But it takes more than just yelling and screaming, right? We got to get deeper into, as they said, in the election process.
So what can we do, Nick? I know you talked about voting.
Yeah, so we're going, but it's deeper than just, you look at the federal level, you have the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice, you know, they can put forth ways to hold folks accountable at the federal level, but then you're not looking at federal police walking through your community. You have multiple, you know, I live in the Washington metro area, but you go into DC and you do have federal police departments all throughout because of the different agencies. Mm-hmm. Cross the line into Prince George's County, you're either going to deal with you got to go through MPD, coming through DC, you got to go through Metropolitan Police Department, then you get into Prince George's County, and then you'll run into possibly Prince George's County Police, then you may drive through District Heights, and then you got to go through the municipal police of District Heights. Depending on where you go, you could be dealing with, if you get on Route 4, you can be dealing with Maryland State Troopers getting on 495. So who controls all of these particular police forces? That's why they say you have to vote up and down the ballot. That's the importance of saying that. Just telling people that, I don't think they have a total wraparound understanding of all of the departments and who's in control of each one of these departments. When you look at issues that Prince George's County has been facing with police brutality from the 80s, you know, it was a well-known factor that if you were Black coming into Prince George's County, coming across that DC line into the county, you would get your head bust in. That was right. A own conversation starter with Black folks coming to the county back in the days. You can ask anybody that. And so, but who's responsible for the police? The police department is the police chief. Who's responsible for the police chief? It's the county executive. Okay. And so you understand you need to focus on voting on a county executive who will hold a police chief accountable, getting them out, keeping them on board. That's the type of focus on voting we need to deal with. When you look at driving through a municipality and you wonder who's responsible for appointing this police chief, it's that mayor that's responsible for that police chief. So you need to be focusing in on that mayor, but who confirms the municipality police chief? Who confirms the county police chief? It's confirmed by the county council and the city councils. So you got to focus on voting for those city council members, those county council members who are actually going to do something and hold folks accountable as well. So you got to look at every single candidate across the board when you're looking at how we hold folks accountable.
One point on that, Nick, so that I can follow up on that particular point. So certainly in terms of going up and down the ballot and how that's important in affecting change. But another issue that has come up particularly recently is we have police officers that have been fired from one jurisdiction, have switched over and gone to another jurisdiction. So what can we do to prevent that?
So in Maryland, one of the things we just recently passed with the swift and uniform penalties for police misconduct, as we have the decertification process now where the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, they must decertify police officers who are convicted of a felony, convicted of certain misdemeanors, and who were previously fired or resigned while being investigated for serious misconduct or use of force and other jurisdictions. And so, you know, in Maryland, we had to deal with this issue with the Anton Black case. There's an officer who became an internet sensation, let's just say, for kicking a Black man in the face in Delaware. And he got fired because of the community involvement, all of the noise that was made. He was fired, but the guy ended up coming into the state of Maryland over on the Eastern Shore, was decertified. His record, everything transferred over, no problems. There was no real background investigation as to why he was leaving the previous police force. And this guy comes in and overzealously tases the young Anton Black to death as soon as he gets on the police force in the state of Maryland. And so being able to look into all of these police officers' records, understand, you know, what have they done, how are they being held accountable, getting rid of the chief of police being the last person having to say so on should we keep or fire, getting a civilian review board in, you know, level of accountability increases. In addition to that, one of the other things that we got through the legislature this year, as far as looking at the command level deficiencies within the police department, because if that police officer is out here acting rogue, what is his supervisor doing about this?
Exactly.
Is the supervisor pushing this under the rug? Yes or no? If the supervisor is pushing this under the rug, you got to hold that supervisor accountable as well. And so clearing all of those gaps out, accountability in place, I think that's critical. But in order to do that, you know, we did this as a legislature. This is statewide police accountability and police legislation. So you got to make sure you're voting for a legislator who will go into Annapolis or into any state house and support this type of movement, to protect folks that look like you and I, to protect our children. You know, a lot of us, man, when, you know, I don't know how many of you guys have children, but, you know, when I look at, you know, my young son, you know, these bills were no brainers. When I look at brothers, you know, these bills are no brainers. When I look at myself in the mirror, these bills are no brainers. So we got to have somebody who has that ability to understand, to go into a legislature and support these types of bills, if not introducing them or voting for them themselves. But back to what I was saying, as far as the voting apparatus, man, we have to really get involved in that process and know who's responsible for what. You know, the governor of Maryland is responsible for the state troopers. So if the governor isn't holding the state troopers accountable, like we're dealing with issues with that right now with the state troopers, there are not enough African Americans in the Maryland state troopers. The Black Caucus has been calling on the governor to increase the amount of Black people that are on the force. But we don't have enough people on the force still with the Maryland state troopers.
That's right.
Maryland's about 40% African American, and we still don't have, and I think the population of Black police officers is literally like 3%, 4%, right, something crazy like that. Don't quote me on the number, but it's a very low number. True. And that's ridiculous. So accountability, you gotta know who you're holding accountable, from the governor, dealing with all of the state troopers, when you're looking at the county police departments, the county executive and the county council, because the county council, they vote on that budget for the police as well. When you look at the municipal police, that mayor and that city council or town council, they vote on the police as well. So, I mean, on the police budget. So you have to look at all of these particular positions and hold folks accountable. And luckily for us in Prince George's County, we have a county executive who is going through a huge transformation of the police force right now. He just brought in a brand new police chief from outside. There was a lot of issues. Somebody said, why aren't more eligible Black men applying to the police department? And
yeah, I'm going to ask Lee that question. So Lee, so we say, so transparency, and they say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So what can we do in terms of transparency to these issues, particularly in the police department? Scott and Lanita talked about culture. Culture eats strategy. So all of these policies can be effective, but the culture within police departments are really going to drive the day. So talk to me about what can we do to effectuate culture inside local law enforcement offices?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do is make sure, and just, I'm going to play a little bit off of what Delegate Charles has said. The leadership is critical. Whoever the chief is, whoever the top command staff are, those are the people that are critical, I think, to setting the pace as to what the culture of the organization is going to be. Because you are going to run up against a union. You are going to run up against organizations that, you know, they're looking out for the needs of the rank and file, but you also can use that in my estimation, you can also use that to your benefit. Because one of the things I used to do when I was a chief at one of my universities is making sure that I paid attention and I listened to what the officers we're talking about. So I think, you know, whoever is leading has to set the pace, has to set the culture, or
culture can't be delegated. No, as you know, culture can't be delegated. So I appreciate the fact that you led that from the top down.
You've got to be on the front line. You've got to know, and they've got to know you and what you are all about and what you care about. Because I think communication is critical. When officers understand that the chief understands what's going on with them and how they relate to people and how they serve or don't serve, and how you will pay a price if you don't do the right things. Those kind of things have got to be measured. So leadership is critical. One of the things, a friend of mine is a chief, and here's one of the things he said. He said, it's time for us as law enforcement leaders to own these mistakes publicly and correct them, to change the cultures within our police departments, and to truly show compassion and integrity. Because after all, we work for the communities. You take communities away, you take people away, police officers don't have a job.
Which, so how, you know, are you in favor of, to that point, are you in favor of residency requirements? We saw this come up in the Derek Chauvin trial, where police officers outside the city of Minneapolis in the neighboring town, in the shooting that happened during the course of the Derek Chauvin trial, those officers, I think there was a small percentage of officers that actually lived in that community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, that is a huge issue all over the country, because you have officers of, you know, the area. For example, in Prince George's County, we have officers that live in other counties as far away as the Eastern Shore. And so what is their commitment? What is their dedication to Prince George's County? That's a huge issue for me. I've lived in Prince George's County since the mid-70s. And so my commitment was to live in Prince George's County if I'm going to work in Prince George's County. I'm a Prince Georgian. So, you know, but I understand people, you know, they may want to look at a different place for their family to move, to live and all that. But I think a community is better served by people from the community who understand the community and can contribute to the community.
And that's something we can legislate. Absolutely. And that's something we can legislate.
I mean, maybe.
Scott, what do you think? Give me your reaction to that discussion.
Unless you've got a community policing program, whether they live in the community or not, leadership has really got to get to this us versus them mentality, right? Because that's what the police personality is in most major urban police departments. I mean, it's us versus them. I mean, what do the police do? This whole model of solving crimes. You ever done a ride out with the police? Ride out with the police, you get in the police. I've done one in New York and DC and several. And they ride around, they get a radio call, and 4 or 5, because there may not be anything else going on in their district, go. The crime's been committed already. They do an investigation, turn it over to the detective, or they go chase the bad guys, right? As a citizen, what do I care that you show up after the fact, right? I wish our value system in our police department was focused on preventing crime versus solving crimes, because it's too late once the crime's committed. And I'll be honest with you, if I've been robbed, mugged, or killed, or a family member has, I appreciate you arresting the guy and you can get convicted, but the damage is everlasting. But if we focus on preventing crime, that means you've got community policing. That means you got dollars in your department to put people in the community, to walk the community, to get to know the community, versus this us versus them. When I was in the complaint room as a prosecutor, let me tell you something. The New York City Police Department, their members would come into the Manhattan Criminal Complaint Room and refer to people they arrested, right? You're talking about this is our community. They would refer to us as either black or brown, never white. They would call us perps, dogs, mopes. Now, if you come in the prosecutor's office and you're referring to people you arrested like that, what do you think they're doing on the street with people that look like you and I? Why do you think every black man in America, if they're telling the truth, has had a negative experience with a police officer and a lack of leadership in resolving these issues? Is how you interact with the public in your community, especially black and brown people. That's
what
where
would that
you got
look
to
like?
get to.
So Scott, tell
and
me what that would
preventing
look like.
crime is far better than solving it.
Tell me what proactive policing would actually look like. Give us an example of what that would actually look like.
That includes people, police officers walking the beat in these communities, riding bikes, participating in their community events, talking and regularly interacting with the police, so that there is this community relationship, right? And then lastly, not tolerating crime being committed, but their mere presence is a preventive measure as well as a community enhancement measure, so that they're building relationships with the people in this community to prevent drug dealing, to prevent the minor crimes that are usually committed, who commit major crimes, if you will, and having a presence. The problem with community policing and partnering with churches and community groups and sororities and fraternities is it's expensive. And so it's not, even before you get to defunding the police, if you're going to really do a community policing program, you have to invest the dollars, and it gets expensive. Yeah. And that's up to the council members, that's up to the state legislature, that's up to mayors and governors. And historically, there's been a balance, but normally there's not enough, or the community policing program in most jurisdictions is not significant enough to make that difference.
Yeah. And most of us have grown up in communities where you had the police athletic league. To that point, Scott, those community athletic leagues and recreational centers that were sponsored by the police departments in most major cities around the country have now been defunded. To that point specifically. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, so I wanted to expand a little bit on what Scott was saying. One of the things, the community policing philosophy is, he's right on point about that, but it's got to be a philosophy. It can't be a program. It's got to be a philosophy. It's got to be the way that we operate. That's the way we
I'll
operate.
take that friendly amendment.
Yeah.
Very good. We'll take that.
Yeah. So one of the things that came out in the 21st century policing recommendations under the Obama administration was the guardian mentality versus the warrior mentality. We've got to be more of a guardians for these communities, working in partnership with the communities, because that's the way that you get people to help you. That's the way that you understand who the people are, and they understand who you are. That's how you learn. And that's how you show that you care for people. And to me, that's what's important. The community policing philosophy is, as Scott was saying, yes, it's an expensive program, but in the long run, if it's being done right, if it's being done down the chain of command, involved in the community. One of the things, again, I'll go back to this. When I was the chief at one of the universities I worked at, we used to have a couple of days a week where the command staff would actually go out into the community and walk the community and talk with people in the community up and down the campus. So it's one of those things that a leader has got to really inculcate those things in the organization.
And that's developing meaningful relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Nick, what can we do on the legislative side to support what we're talking about in terms of community policing?
Rich, I think we're doing it, man. This past year also, we have added $10 million in funding and tuition support. See, I went into the Air Force. Once I graduated from high school, I went to college for a year, then I went off to the Air Force first. And one of the main contributing factors I went to the Air Force because they said they were gonna give me some money for college.
There you go.
And when
Yes, sir.
you got a lot of people who choose to go into the military from all across the country because of that one particular reason. And so when we have funding mechanisms to go towards folks that live in the community to come back and police in your own community, because we got money in the budget that's allowing to pay for your education. I think we have to steal some of that, which we have at the state level, stealing some of the traction that the federal government used with getting folks into the United States military. I think that part is very critical. And then you got to see that folks are within the community, and we do have that. Within Prince George's County, we have a COPS program, a community officer policing, community-oriented policing.
But PG County does not have a residency requirement as of yet. Is that accurate?
No. It's no residency requirement, but there is a COPS program where you have officers who they're at every single community meeting, all of the different community events. You'll see is there all the time. Back when I was running for office, man, a lot of the cops they tell me, "Oh man, Nick, if you don't know Miss Such and Such, hey man, you on the wrong side. You better go her. You better go know her. You better know her." And these young brothers, they grew up in the county. So it's a different perspective when you grow up in a community and you go back to police that same community. So, these brothers have been doing their thing as far as making sure that they keep the community with understanding everything that's going on. But at the same time, I saw some questions in there. It's going to be hard to stop all crime. That's, as somebody said, it's unrealistic. I think it is unrealistic. And you have to have a like that, right, where somebody is in my back pocket in my rearview mirror every second, just waiting for me to do something, just if I'm gonna do it or not. And so we have to have it has to be a fine balance, right? It has to be a fine balance where we have officers that are actually engaged, officers that's from our community, and we need. I tell a couple of my buddies who are cops. I said,
and they have to have some level of sensitivity though for these issues. So it's not
Rich,
just
but
right?
as far as holding people accountable, I tell some of my buddies who are cops, like, listen, and this is just me being frank. I say, y'all need to smack some of y'all friends around that's on the force. I said, because they're gonna continue to do what they want to do. If you're in boot camp and you mess up in boot camp and everybody got to do push-ups, you're gonna get backed in the corner somewhere.
Right.
And that level of accountability has to be there. And until that's there, I think folks are going to continue to try to get away. But we put a lot of great pieces of legislation in Maryland in place to hold folks accountable from that side. But then once the individual cops on the force start holding them accountable as well, I think, man, we'll be 20 steps ahead when we see that level of accountability from individual officers holding each other accountable too.
I want to switch gears and talk about qualified immunity. Lenita, before she left, raised that as a potential issue and said, well, we might not be able to go so far as having qualified immunity, but at a minimum, we need to have some impediment for police officers that engage in conduct that at least they could be held accountable, whether they have some sort of insurance policy, some way of getting to them from a civil aspect that will impact their ability and affect the quality of their decision making. So Scott, I want to hear you, and then I'm going to go to you, Lee.
Well, qualified immunity is a federal judiciary created concept that essentially says that if the police officers are acting within the scope of their employment, unless they do something egregious, or if there's a pattern, if you don't have a pattern and practice of this behavior by the police department, then you cannot be prosecuted for violating someone's constitutional rights.
Well, you can't be held civilly liable, right? You can't be held civilly liable, right? So is that a real deterrent?
Well, you can't be held civilly liable. You're absolutely right. But that standard is if you're operating within the scope of your employment and in the course of your duty, there's an argument that you have violated my constitutional rights. Unless it's egregious or the pattern in practice, then they can't be civilly prosecuted.
Yes.
And so I don't know how you compromise immunity. When you talk about reasonable force, I'm a big proponent of necessary force, because reasonable force takes you down a rabbit hole of interpretation.
Yes.
But you can tell from a picture or video whether it was necessary force. And when you look at these videos of the police officers body slamming people or shooting people because they're scared of them, or because they're trying to give them a ticket for a light being out, or for an air freshener being held, being up on their rear view mirror, and it's over, you're from 0 to deadly force, then that's not necessary force. But more importantly, there's got to be some exposure for the police officers for bad conduct. You know, being a police officer is the only profession where will give you a gun and a badge. You have under authority of law, you can arrest me, charge me, and shoot me or beat me. And if it turns out that you're wrong about it, there are no repercussions generally from making that mistake. Something's wrong with that.
Yes.
Sure, you could be put on desk duty. You may be suspended, but most of the time not. You basically say, oops, well, I feared for my life, or I feared that he was going to tase me or shoot me or what have you. And basically the cop walks away. Something wrong with that when you give him a gun and a badge like that. There ought to be repercussions. And the repercussions for me, if I'm a bad lawyer, right? I lose my license.
You lose your license. That's right.
You know, but with police officers, for the most part, right?
Yeah.
If you shoot me, maim me, and you're wrong, or perhaps you used excessive force, there's no real repercussions. You don't lose your job. You don't lose your compensation. You don't go to jail most of the time because the juries aren't going to convict you, right? The juries aren't you. And so this kind of oops theory police officers operate under, that's got to change. And the way you change that is you get rid of qualified immunity, or you start to put it in policies that will affect their checkbook or their job security, and you put their job loss in a national database or something. Because right now, there are little, if any, significant repercussions if I pull out a gun and I've got authority of law and I shoot you and I'm wrong about it, I keep my job. Something wrong with that.
Lee.
Fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. Scott
Give us your reaction.
Scott
just said.
He's spot on. I mean, there's got to be repercussions to the things that the bad things that police officers do, because in the end, the citizens end up paying for that. You know, these large settlements that we hear about, who do you think is paying that? The citizens. That so, as a Prince Georgian, I pay my taxes. I want to make sure that my taxes are being used for education, for health, for public safety, but not to pay lawsuits when people do wrong. There's got to be some sort of repercussion. So when it comes to qualified immunity, I think we really, really need to take a serious look at how it impacts police officers. It can't be what Scott just talked about. I can shoot you, I can maim you, I can, whatever, and get away with it when in fact I was wrong. And I think that's one of the hammers that need to be changed in order to help police chiefs to make police officers and departments more accountable. Because in the end, the citizens end up paying for that mistake.
Delegate Nick Charles.
I just want to piggyback on that. And, A. Scott brought up some good stuff and Lee brought up some stuff. And that's why, I'm happy to be on this call, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about, Maryland has really set the pace for the country to follow. And what I'm about to follow up with is we have a no compliance, no funding policy now at the state, where a police agency can lose their state and public safety grants if an officer fails to comply with the use of force statute. And so that's one of the things that can happen. And we've also increased the strengthening of and the limitations of use of force and the criminal penalties. Now, in Maryland law, police officers are subject to 10 years imprisonment for a violation of that standard. And that sentence is indicative with any other sentence as well.
Yep.
But, you know, we have some of these things in place in the state of Maryland now. And so we are in and not necessarily a good space, because an officer still can violate these same laws, and we can end up losing another innocent human life and have to follow all of these protocols and put somebody in jail when we really just want folks to obey the law and not actually harm citizens when they're doing their jobs. And that's what we really want. You know, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but some of these guys just can't for some reason. And the state of Maryland body has come up with ways to hold those jokers accountable.
Scott,
Yeah, you
talk
know,
to me about this whole notion of making these split-second decisions. Where,
yeah, I saw that come across.
so talk to me about that. Give us your reaction to that question. Are we talking about split-second decisions? You prosecuted police officers for misconduct. You certainly looked at cases where people have to make a decision as to whether or not they've engaged in criminal conduct. Talk to us about give us your reaction to that question.
Hey, you know what? Let me tell you something. The police officers have a difficult job. There's no doubt about it. Sometimes they make split-second decisions. Sometimes they make intentional decisions, as in the George Floyd case, right? That they've got a difficult job. I don't deny that it's split-second decisions, and I don't deny that when something's wrong, if somebody's on my property or if I'm in danger, who you gonna call? I'm gonna
The
call
time
the
seems to be
police.
compressed when it's us, though. Doesn't it seem to be that way? When it's us, when
not
we're the
only
person that's involved, it seems like the time seems to compress.
Well, that's true. But wait a minute, you don't have a right to be a police officer. If you can't make that split-second decision, if you ain't trained, then you don't need to have the gun and the badge then. And by the way, if you make that mistake, right, in good faith, but you are in this position of expertise, and there has to be repercussions, whether it's intentional or whether it's a mistake. And you sign up for that, right?
That's
So
right.
I'm not going to let you off the hook because your job is difficult, because you asked to be in this position, you got trained, and now I need you to be excellent. And every day I need police officers to think about excellence and act in an excellent manner. That should be their goal. They should strive for that every day. And if they fail, there are going to be repercussions of that because they asked for this responsibility. I'm not going to let them off the hook, and none of us on this call should let them off the hook about the challenges that they accepted by wanting to be a police officer. You can't have it both ways.
That's right. Lee.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, you can't have it both ways. You know, when you sign up for this job, it's a tough job. And when it comes to that split-second decision, you know, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And you've got to know, you've got to be trained to that place where you've got to make the right decision. And I think, you know, it comes with experience. It comes with good training, good education, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, you know, we are accountable to the people. That's the bottom line. And we've got to always keep that in mind. But you know, those situations are going to pop up where somebody's going to roll up on you, and you know, before you know it, there's a gun in your face. You're going to have to make a decision. So it's a tough job, just like Scott was saying. However, you know, I think with great training, with accountability, with repercussions for making mistakes, I think police departments, you know, have the potential to get better. Let's put it that way, but not on their own. They can't do it on their own. It's got to be with the community.
Nick, why don't you bring us home? This will be our last point of the day. Thank you.
You know, I agree with everything Scott and Lee said, man. We have to have accountability across the board, and it's going to take all of us on this call right now, everybody that's listening, to make sure they are a part of the process. If you don't like the way the police department is being handled in your jurisdiction, I say the chief. So who is your county executive? Who is your mayor? Hold those folks accountable. Get involved in the process and put the accountability in your own hands first. And then let's come together so we can do it with larger numbers.
Scott, I knew you were going to say something. I don't want to leave you out, so go ahead.
No, just real quick. I was going to say I had a hard stop at 8 and I got to hop. But let me really congratulate and do a thumbs up for Delegate Charles and the Maryland legislature. They are leaders in this police reform piece. And let's not, you know, he's not underselling it, but they vetoed they overcame and overrode a veto of a popular Republican governor in a majority Democratic state. And they're veto proof, and they showed up, they showed out, and they did the right thing, right? And they're going to be known as leaders in this country. And the real key is to follow up and to hold all of these police departments accountable based on this new legislation. And so it's a real pleasure to be on here with Delegate Charles as well as Lee James. But as a delegate and your leadership on this, your votes are saving lives. And I didn't want that to get away from us, all those listening and on the panel, of how powerful that decision was under Delegate Charles's leadership and the Congressional Black Caucus of Maryland. So thank you very much. And I want to thank the Omegas for giving me the opportunity to present. And Lee, a great meeting you, and appreciate your experience and leadership as well.
Thank you, Scott Bolden. Thank you, Lee James. And thank you, Delegate Nick Charles. Everyone have a wonderful evening. This was a fantastic discussion, and we look forward to part 2.
Yes, sir.